Okay, so the difference, the interpleural difference is 4 millimeters. Why does that matter? That matters because this, right? Okay, now I'm not going to do it, but if I get Joseph to come up here and he sticks his hands out and I stick my hands out, we both push, right? What's going to happen? Now, Joseph is a lot stouter than I am, right?
Okay,
if he pushes hard, I'm going to do this, right? Because he's a lot stronger than I am. Yes? Right? You ought to see his dad. But anyway, okay? So what happens is I push, he pushes. He's got more pressure. He's going to push me back, right? Yes. So guess what? I got 760 here. I got 756 here. Okay? This is a trick question. But anyway. All right, Joseph. What is greater, 760 or 756?
760.
760 is greater, which means I got 760 millimeters pushing, and I got 756 pushing over here. And the difference is 4 millimeters. And that 4 millimeter difference means our lungs stay inflated. Okay? Right? Right? Oh, by the way, if I'm in a bicycle race around the world, one of those adventure races, and I'm running past a tree, and I run into the tree, and a branch of the tree goes pow and pokes me right through here, guess what? That 4 millimeters is gone. It's open to the outside, so I got a 760 and a 760. What can happen to my lungs? My lung on that side. It can collapse because that 4 millimeter difference is different, right? And oh, by the way, if it was an arrow or a bullet and it goes all the way into here, then I got a sucking chest wound. And it can deflate very quickly, okay? But that's a different story. But that little 4 millimeter difference, okay, that little 4 millimeter difference means a difference in our lungs collapsing and our lungs staying open, okay? Just that 4 millimeter difference. Okay? Yes. Now, let's go ahead and talk about, let me find the page. Let's go ahead and talk about breathing, inhalation and exhalation. Okay? Right? What happens? Now, this is figure 21.13 in your book. Figure 21.13. Okay? But bear in mind, that is why the lungs stay inflated, because that 4 millimeter difference. Okay? Because there's more pushing out than there is pushing in. Right? Okay? Now, for inspiration, what is going to happen? Number one, the inspiratory muscles are going to contract. Right? The external intercostals, the ones between my lungs, between my ribs, right? They're going to do this. They're going to contract. Right? And my diaphragm is going to go down. When my diaphragm goes down and my chest goes up, this space gets bigger. Okay? And when that happens, the thoracic cavity gets bigger. Okay? Right? It stretches those lungs. Okay? And what happens is that the pressure inside the lungs, because you stretched it, goes down about minus 1 millimeter. Okay? All right. We know at sea level in 1 atmosphere, if you measure is 760. All right, Joseph. Come on, let's see if you can go 2 for 2. 760 minus 1 is?
759.
759. That 1 millimeter difference from the outside to the inside, because my lungs got bigger, means air's coming in. Oh, by the way, when those muscles relax, right? Remember the diaphragm went down. Don't ever forget that. Diaphragm goes down when you inhale, right? Well, when those muscles relax, the external intercostals, The diaphragm comes up, thoracic cavity gets smaller, right? And thoracic cavity gets smaller, okay? And when it gets smaller, it squeezes the lung, and it goes up about +1, and guess what happens? I won't breathe on you. Right? That's what happens. About 1 millimeter up, about 1 millimeter down makes us breathe in, makes us breathe out. Difference in pressure. It's all about the pressure. It's all about the pressure. Okay? Now, we use the pressure at sea level, 1 atmosphere, okay? But we don't live at sea level, so our pressure is a little lower, but still about 1 millimeter difference, okay? Now, in order to further understand that, let's talk about, well, I tell you what, because I love you people, I know you're getting bored. I thought we'd have some music today, okay? So, I hope you guys are fans of the accordion, right? Yes? Now, I will too take requests, but anyway, yes? Okay, right, my little... Okay, what happens when I pull this apart? The chamber in here gets what? Bigger. And all the molecules of air in there get closer together or further apart? Further apart. When the molecules get further apart, then guess what happens? The pressure goes down, right? And when the pressure goes down, it sucks air in. Oh, by the way, when I squeeze it, right? When I squeeze it, right? What happens to the molecules of air in here? They get squeezed together. When they get squeezed together, does the pressure go up or down, Miss Madison? It goes up. It goes up, right? So the pressure inside the chamber goes down and it sucks air in. The pressure inside the chamber, when I squeeze it, goes up and it blows the air out, right? Yes? In the same way, that happens to the lungs. When we breathe in, and the chamber's bigger, right? And when the chamber's bigger, the molecules of air spread out and the pressure goes down. Conversely, when I breathe out, when those muscles relax, guess what? This chamber gets smaller, and when this chamber gets smaller, it squeezes the air and the pressure goes up. But here's the thing, just like this, it's not closed. So when this squeezes, right, the air comes out, right? That's what happens to the lungs, okay? It has to do with chemistry. It has to do with gases, okay? Mr. Boyle, okay? Mr. Boyle, right? He said this, right? The pressure inside a chamber, as long as the temperature remains constant. If the chamber's enlarged, the molecules spread out and the pressure will go down. The molecules aren't crammed together. Conversely, when it's squeezed, the molecules are squeezed closer together, smaller amount of volume, right? Yes? Then what happens is that the pressure goes up, right? Anybody besides me a scuba diver in here? Anybody? Right? They pump air in that tank and there's a lot of pressure in that air. That's why that thing in your mouth is called a regulator, so all the air doesn't come out at one time. It only comes out under a certain pressure so it doesn't injure my lungs, right? But the air is compressed in that scuba tank, right? Now, there's so much air in this bottle because she's drank so much water, right? If I squeeze this down, the pressure is going to go higher, right? If I take the lid off, the gas can escape, it's going to go lower, right? And so it has to do with Mr. Boyle and Mr. Boyle's law that says basically you change the size of the chamber and the pressure's going up or down. By breathing, when we inhale, chest muscles go up, diaphragm goes down, chamber gets bigger, creates negative pressure in here, and I inhale. Conversely, when the muscles relax, and that's another thing to note, it takes energy to breathe in, but to breathe out, it takes no energy because, like the balloon, it's going to go down to its smallest size, right? So what's going to happen is when my external intercostals and my diaphragm relaxes, right? Right? You don't have a big brother, okay? But I'll tell you, big brothers, right? They're bad. They're mean. They sit on your chest and you can't breathe because you can't get the air in. Ask me how I know, okay? But anyway, right? So you need to get this concept that Mr. B-O-Y-L-E, I forgot the E, pardon me, Mr. Boyle. But anyway, he taught us that. It's a law. Gas is going to expand to the size of the chamber, okay? Right? Gas molecules want to spread out as much as they can, okay? Unless the chamber's capped. They'll spread out so far, and that's as far as they can go if you have a lid on it, right? Okay? But here, it's not capped. But anyway. So, inhalation takes energy. Muscles have to lift the chest, and the diaphragm has to contract, and when the diaphragm contracts, it comes down, making the chest big. Right? Right? Does it make sense? Do I need to go over it again? It's only about, just like my little accordion there. If I pull it apart, air gets sucked in because the pressure went down. If I squeeze it, air gets pushed out, right? Yes? Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, now, let's talk about the next concept. Mr. Dalton, okay? Mr. Dalton, Dalton's law, okay? Now, the air that we breathe, right? It's a mixture. It's not a compound. It's not chemically mixed. It's a mixture. And our book says about 78.2% of the air we breathe is nitrogen. And about 21 point, I can't remember, 7, 8, 9, something, almost 22% is oxygen. About 0.3% is CO2, right? And then about 0.04 is water vapor, okay? So we have these three gases in the water, right? We have 4 different things that make up air, basically, okay? We know at sea level, 1 atmosphere is 760 millimeters. 760 millimeters, okay? If we take 78.2 times 760, 21.7 times 760, 0.3, 0.04 times 760, right? Okay. Then what happens is that the pushing, the weight of the air, or the pushing, it's a combination of all these factors pushing, right? And let me see, what page is that in the book? It has the exact numbers, which, here we go. 597, 159.3, 3.7. 597, 159.3, 0.3, 3.7. If you add all those up, guess what you get? 760, right? So Mr. Dalton, his is a partial pressure law, okay? And let me explain. All that means is this. Okay? It just means that we're going to measure how much oxygen in our blood, how much CO2 in our blood, right? And we're going to call it PO2, the partial pressure of oxygen. PCO2, right? The partial pressure of CO2, right? And that's where that comes from, because air is made up of these different concentrations. 78.2% nitrogen, right? So of the 760 millimeters, 597 millimeters of it is because of nitrogen. 159 millimeters of this is because of the oxygen. 0.3 and 3.7 because the CO2 in the water. But anyway, if you add it all up. But that's why it always says PO2, PCO2. It's a measure of partial pressure, how much pressure of oxygen or CO2 in the blood. That's mainly what we're going to talk about. Nitrogen too, but we're not going to talk about that, right? Now, we got one more guy, Mr. Henry, okay? And Mr. Henry, if you take an Erlenmeyer flask and you got some water in that flask, okay? And it is open to the air, okay? Some of that air is going to dissolve in the water. But the amount, remember air is made up of nitrogen, CO2, oxygen, right? And the amount that gets dissolved in here is going to be based on the partial pressure, okay? And what I mean by that is this. Because we said, 597 millimeters is nitrogen. More nitrogen is going to dissolve in there than oxygen. Oxygen is only 159 millimeters pushing in there, okay? But how much is dissolved in the liquid is going to be based on its partial pressure, okay? Based on its partial pressure. Now, what in the HE double hockey sticks does that have to do with anything? I tell you what it has to do with this, right? When we breathe in, we're going to have a bunch of O2 in here, right? Fresh air. Oh, by the way, when that blood comes back, I drew it in red because I don't have a blue. This should be blue, right? That's deoxygenated blood. Okay? And so basically, it's going to have a lot of CO2 in it, yes? And so basically, what's going to happen is this, right? Okay? Remember, if me and Joseph are pushing, he's stronger, he's going to push me back, right? If the concentration in here is higher, because the concentration is higher, it's going to diffuse into the bloodstream. Right? Oh, by the way, in the blood vessel, the concentration of CO2 is going to be higher. And because the concentration of CO2 is higher in the blood vessel, guess what it's going to do? It's going to go into the alveoli, right? It's all about the pressure. It's going to go from high pressure to low pressure. Okay? And this has to do with Mr. Henry's law. Basically, this says, okay, from here, oxygen is going to get pushed into the blood vessels. And from here, CO2, right, systemic circulation. It's been all the way around my body, and it's picked up a lot of the waste gas, the CO2. And that CO2 is higher concentration there than the CO2 in the air that I breathe is only 0.3%, right? Not very much, see? So because the CO2 is higher in the blood vessel, it's going into the alveolus, and I'm going to do this. Breathe out, okay? So it's a little bit of gas chemistry, right? But basically, depending on where the pressure is and what the pressures are, okay, that's what makes the air going from high pressure into the blood vessel, CO2 going from high blood pressure or high pressure in the capillary into the lung, and when we squeeze that down, we're breathing out, okay, right? But anyway, we say PO2. What's this PO2? What's a PCO2, right? That's just basically a measure of how much oxygen and how much CO2 are in our blood, right? Okay? Oh, by the way, we said that moves due to pressure. Guess what? Right? Same thing happens down here in my big toe, right? If my hemoglobin's full of oxygen, it's going to be higher than what's in the tissues. And what's it going to do? Go into the tissues. Oh, by the way, in my big toe down here, maybe I've been jogging. Maybe my big toe's got a lot of CO2 in it because I've been running. Where's the CO2 going to go? Into the bloodstream because it's higher, right? Right? That's why we got more CO2 in the blood vessel and we got more oxygen in here. And that's why they switch. Okay? Does that make sense? That's why in the tissues, the CO2 goes in the bloodstream. And in the tissues, the oxygen's higher level, so it's going to come out. Right? And oh, by the way, if I'm jogging or something, right, then I'm going to get a lot of CO2. I'm going to breathe out a lot of CO2. And a lot of the oxygen from the blood is going to be unloaded. Okay? Right? So that's that concept. And we're going to talk more about that later. Okay? Now, I guess I'm going to go back to the start. Those are little complicated concepts. That's why I did it. Don't you love this? Isn't that cool? Bought that several years ago. I wish I could play something, right? Yes? Can you say Los Lonely Boys? Yes. All right. So, anyway, yeah, I think I'm going to call my friend or text my friend in the morning and have him play some of her music on the KXIT. Yeah? Okay. So, what keeps our lung open? About 1 millimeter of pressure, lower or higher. Makes the air go in or out. Right? What makes the pressure change? The change in the size of the chamber. Right? What makes the gas go in? It goes from higher level to a lower level. And we measure that as PO2 or PCO2. Right? And that is a function of Henry's law. Right? Because, oh, by the way, blood is liquid and air is a gas, right? Get it? Get it? Yes. Right? So, okay. Let's start at the very beginning now. And let's start at the very beginning now and talk about that, right? Okay. First off, cellular respiration. Cellular respiration. That is how the individual cells use oxygen and produce CO2, okay? Now, we're not going to talk about that now because that's chapter 23, another one of my favorite chapters about how amazing we take that ATP and we make energy and we do cool stuff, right? So, we're not going to talk about at the cellular level, okay? Right? Now, right at the very beginning, we talk about the anatomy of Okay, the anatomy of, starting with the nose, the noble nose, right? Yes. You got the septum down the middle. On the inside of the nose, you have wrinkles that look like that, right? And those are called nasal concha, Nasalconcha, nasal concha. This is the inside of the nose, right? And what does this do? Because it's wrinkly here, right? It holds P's and B's when kids stick stuff up their nose. That's what it does. No, it's true, but anyway, right? No, that increases the surface area, right? It increases the surface area so we can smell better, right? And oh, by the way, one of the purposes of the nose is it warms the air. It warms the air that we breathe in that goes into our lungs, okay? It warms the air, yes? Okay? Now, okay. Down the middle of the nose, we have the septum, S-E-P-T-U-M, just like the middle of the heart. We have a septum down the middle, right? When I was a kid, it was very big. Oh, you got a deviated septum, and they did surgery on your nose. That's very common. Newsflash, almost everyone has a deviated septum, right? Because we are not symmetrical. We are not, okay? And such. So, we also talked about how the nasal cavity and the sinuses give off nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator, which keeps our blood pressure low. And oh, by the way, that nitric oxide, it kills germs when we breathe in. So when we're doing the mouth breather thing, we're not killing germs before they go down into our chest. Okay, so that's way back. Okay? Okay. Now, nose has little hairs, right? Called vibrissae, V-I-B-R-I-S-S-A-E, vibrissae, okay? Right? And they're coated with mucus and they pick up stuff. And they act like a filter. Yes? Oh, by the way, anybody been skiing before? You go skiing, what do you got to have in your pocket? Especially if you have little children. Huh?
Tissues.
Say it louder, please. Tissues. How come? Because those little nasal hairs, when they're really cold, right? They stop moving. They stop pushing that mucus back, and it comes out the front. So when you go skiing, you better have some tissues ready, especially if you have little children, right? Yes? My favorite climbing gloves. Guess what they have? Right here and right here. Soft, fuzzy material. What's that for? When you don't have tissues, right? That's what it's for. They're nose wipes. Yeah, they're my favorites. You gotta wash them every time you come home. But anyway, yeah. Okay, so when it's cold. Okay? Now, respiratory mucosa. Pseudo, stratified, ciliated, columnar, epithelium. Right? Pseudo means false. Stratified, right? We talked about that some of the cells are real tall and some of the cells are real short, and it gives the appearance of strata, layers, when it's really not. Ciliated has little hairs, right? And the little hairs brush to move that mucus to the back. We about a quart of mucus we make every day to the back, so it'll go into the esophagus and be swallowed and done away with, right? Come out the other end, right? Columnar, the tall cells, right? The columnar cells, and epithelium, right? That covering tissue where the outside meets the inside, yes? Remember, our skin is epithelium. The lining of our mouth, the mucosa, the GI tract, it's all epithelium, okay? Right? Now, goblet cells, G-O-B-L-E-T, goblet cells, right? Yes, they secrete the mucus, right? And the chemical is called mucin, M-U-C-I-N. It's very sticky, right? Yes, and it'll trap germs also, by the way. Okay? Again, about a quart a day, yes. We talked about in the previous chapter also, those cells secrete defensins, right? And that's, remember, the broad spectrum antibiotic, yes. And there's serous glands, S-E-R-O-U-S, serous, right? Serous fluid, some water with some protein in it, mixed with the mucin to make mucus, right? Okay, there are also some lysozymes, right, to kill germs, okay? Okay, again, this is the superior, middle, and inferior nasal concha. We talked about that, yes. Okay, rhinitis, right? Inflammation of the nasal mucosa, it yields excessive mucus and nasal congestion, right? Rhinitis, yes. Okay, now we talked about in the previous chapter on the skull, we have sinuses, right? Frontal, maxillary, ethmoid up in there, and let's see, sphenoid too, okay? We have sinuses, and they're lined with that epithelial tissue, and the sinuses function they lighten the skull. The skull's not solid bone, so it's a little lighter. But also, too, they do this. They give resonance to the voice, right? Right? And so they also warm and moisten the air, and they secrete that nitric oxide to kill germs. So sinuses are very important. But a lot of people, the holes to the sinuses get plugged up with mucus. And when that happens, well, let's see, it's warm, it's dark, it's moist. When you get those three conditions together, what are you going to get? Bacteria growing, right? The bacteria is going to grow. You can get a sinus infection, right? And the sinus infection causes a lot of people problems. You know, when the pressure goes up and down suddenly, it bothers me. I know one of my friends, he had the surgery. They stick balloons up your nose into the sinuses, and then they blow them up. And they stretch the holes. You get black eyes and look like a raccoon. It's great. So I don't know. I hope not, but I may have to have that someday because it really bugs me sometimes, giving me a sinus headache. Okay? Sinusitis, inflammation of the sinus. Okay? Now, we need to talk about the pharynx, right? There's three parts of the pharynx. The pharynx being the back part. Behind the nose is the nasopharynx. Behind the mouth is the oropharynx. And a little lower down is the laryngopharynx above the larynx, the voice box, right? Okay. There's a lovely picture, number C, figure 21.3. You need to look at that and you'll be able to see the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx, right? Okay. And remember, the nasopharynx, the back wall, has those adenoids that can be really large in children. Okay? The eustachian tubes dump into the nasopharynx, right? And the eustachian tubes are tubes that equalize the pressure from our ears to the back of our nose, right? And that is why and they're normally closed, they're normally closed. And when we get pain in our ear sometime, or when we hear our ears pop, right? You squeeze the nose and you breathe out, and it opens those ear eustachian tubes, or pharyngotympanic tube. The book uses the term. I use the old term, but anyway. And that equalizes the pressure in the ears. Where does the scuba diver go? The deeper he goes, the more pressure on him, and what does he have to do? Equalize the pressure from his ears down, right? Okay? Now, the larynx, okay? The larynx, yes? The larynx up here, the voice box, right? On the top of it, it has a hole called the glottis, Glottis, right? And above it, it has a spoon-shaped projection that closes, comes down and closes over that. And that is, of course, the epiglottis. The epiglottis. And what happens is, anytime we take a drink, the epiglottis does this and covers the hole. And when it covers the hole, we don't get air in our trachea. What happens when you get water or Coke or coffee in your trachea? What happens immediately, if not faster? We start coughing, right? Went down the wrong pipe, right? Yes? The epiglottis closes to keep fluids or anything else out of those lungs. It's very bad to get water in your lungs or to pour Coke down your lungs, right? You start coughing immediately to try to get rid of that, yes? So what happens is when you swallow, the soft palate and the uvula, the little thing hanging down in the back of the throat, they always say, ah, right? Yeah? They raise up. Okay? And the glottis comes down and it's covered until your friend tells a funny joke, right? You're all sitting around the table eating pizza and you start laughing and then all of a sudden, right? That's what happens because it slips, right? But anyway, all right. We already talked about voice production too. By the way, in order to breathe, in order to make a sound, to make noise, right? Yes, we have to breathe out. That's where the sound comes from, breathing out. Okay? So, what is the, by the way, universal sign for choking? Right? Yes? Okay. When someone's choking, what do you do? Okay, number one, if they can talk, right? If they can make a little noise, they're breathing out some, so they still have some airway left, right? If it's totally blocked, right? It's totally blocked, and you got to do the Heimlich maneuver, right? Yes? And the Heimlich maneuver, of course, Joseph, could you come here a minute? Okay? Yes? I don't know why I always pick you. I should pick one of these cute little girls to do this on. But anyway, yeah, if you would turn sideways, right? Heimlich maneuver, yes. I'm going to reach around under his rib cage right here and here, right? Remember sternum, xiphoid process, and right below that. And I'm going to lift, but I'm going to lift up and back, right? For the Heimlich, yes. Right? Here's his ribs. Here's his xiphoid down here. I'm going to put my hand here, and I'm going to put my chest against his, and I'm going to lift up and back. And he's probably going to lean forward a little bit, if you would, sir. There you go, like that. And I'm going to lift up and back. Yes? And you may have to do it 3 or 4 times, right? Thank you, sir.
Okay.
And if it's an old person, you might break one of their ribs, and you save their life. Okay? Now, you can lay a baby down and kind of do that, too. But generally, the baby you take and you flip over and you're swatting them on the back first, right? Yes? And such. And you just keep doing that and you keep squeezing there until the baby starts crying. Because when the baby starts crying, then his airway is open again, right? Okay? There's an internet video that I saw. This lady's in line with her kid and the baby starts choking, right? And just some strange guy grabs the baby, trips them over and starts banging them, and next thing you know, baby's crying. Anyway, save the baby's life. Okay? Okay. The epiglottis, I want to mention, that's elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage. Right? There's another elastic cartilage too, right? Right here. Yes? That's elastic, right? It's not hyaline. That's elastic cartilage. It snaps back. Right? It has more protein fibers in it. Yes? Because if you live 100 years, you're going to need to eat 100 years. Yes? Okay? Right? By the way, you never pour fluids down someone who's unconscious, because when they're unconscious, you'll pour the fluid straight into their lungs. Okay? Okay. In case you're on a desert island somewhere. Okay? The vocal cords, right? The length and the tension on them determines the voice. Yes? And of course, boys get their growth spurt when they go through puberty and their voice changes, and their voice usually gets deeper, right? Yes? Okay. And inflammation of the vocal cords is called laryngitis. Right? Laryngitis. And what's the best treatment for laryngitis? Shut up and don't make a noise. That's the best treatment. Be quiet, yes? Most of the time, laryngitis, most upper respiratory infections are viral, so antibiotics aren't going to do any good, and such. And so, anyway, laryngitis, you got to be quiet, right? Sometimes they give you some things to gargle with and such to make you feel better and all. Okay? Now, let's also talk about when the glottis closes. Yes? Let's talk about Valsalva maneuver. Okay, Valsalva. V-A-L-S-A-L-V-A. Valsalva maneuver. M-A-N-E-U-V-E-R. Okay? Right? Valsalva maneuver is this. The epiglottis closes and our abdominal muscles contract. Yes? Okay? And the Valsalva maneuver does basically several things, but, right? You sit on the toilet, you close your throat, and you squeeze, right? And you defecate, because Valsalva maneuver. Oh, by the way, you do the same thing when you cough, right? That throat closes, this contracts violently, and, or you sneeze especially. Oh my gosh, I hate. Every once in a while I have a sneezing attack, and I sneeze like 20 times in a row. It drives me crazy. But anyway, I was between Dalhart and Hartley one time going like 80, and I got one of those sneeze. I had to pull over and stop because I could not. Oh, by the way, I'll give you $1 million if you can keep your eyes open when you sneeze, because you can't. It's a reflex. Your eyes close so you don't, the germs in your eyes, right? But anyway, okay? Valsalva maneuver, okay? It's also two, coughing, sneezing, or straining at the stool. Valsalva maneuver. And that epiglottis closes and these abdominal muscles tighten down, okay? Now, if you do that a couple of times, it will affect your basal tone. Usually your blood pressure will go down too, okay? That's a trick. But anyway, Valsalva maneuver. Oh, by the way, when people cough, sneeze, or go to the bathroom, okay, that causes increased pressure in here. If there's anything going on in their back, it hurts them. It hurts them. That's a very common question. Does it hurt you to go to the bathroom? Does it hurt you to sit on the toilet? Yeah, how did you know that? I'm a genius. Right? It's just common. Okay? So, Valsalva maneuver, right? Okay. We talked about the trachea, talked about the thyroid and the cricoid cartilage below it. right? We talked about generally men are going to have a bigger Adam's apple because it responds to testosterone. Okay. This is hyaline cartilage. Okay. Okay. The trachea. The trachea, the cells that line it are ciliated, and they do this all day long. They brush. Remember that cilia is going to brush in one direction to move food, not food, to move particles up, like dust or nicotine or ash from your cigarette. They bring it up, 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 so it can be swallowed and doesn't go down in the lungs. Okay? Right? We also talked about how smokers, especially in the morning, they have the chronic cough. They get up in the morning and why is that? Because they don't have that cilia, because the cilia goes away in chronic smokers. So they have that smoker's cough first thing in the morning, especially. They've been laying down there full of mucus. And they got to bring that up. And if they don't, it can block air passages. And if you block air passages, you can get bronchitis or lower respiratory infection. Okay? Okay. A little bit more about the alveoli. The alveoli, right? Type 1 alveolar cells, and they're one cell thick, right? Yes. And they say that a sheet of paper is 15 times thicker than your alveoli, that one cell. Right? Okay. There are also the type 2 alveolar cells, and they produce the surfactant, right? The surfactant, right? And the surfactant breaks the surface tension and keeps the alveoli open. And when the alveoli close, you can't get air in, and you can't get exchange of gases, right? And bad things happen. And we said too, the alveoli have pores to equalize the pressure in between them. Okay? Now, on the alveoli, we have macrophages. 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 Okay? Millions upon millions upon millions of macrophages are crawling around in those alveoli at all times to kill germs. Right? Your lungs should be sterile. If they're not, you get an infection. Right? Right? You get a respiratory infection if those lungs are not sterile. Okay? Now, millions of these alveoli are brought up and then into the esophagus, right? 2 million an hour is what our book says, okay? Okay. If we look at the lungs, yes, as a general rule, the left lung is smaller than the right lung. Why is that? What's the left lung smaller than the right? Why would that be?
Because of your heart?
Because your heart is there. Because your heart is there taking up space on the left. So the left lung is usually smaller than the right. Yes, that's a cardiac notch here, right, in the lung. Yes. The left lung has 2 lobes, 1, 2. The right lung has 3 lobes. Okay, right? Okay, your lung has kind of a skeleton of connective tissue, and we use the word stroma. Stroma, okay? Right? We use the same word in the spleen, S-T-R-O-M-A, right? It actually means mattress, but anyway, right? Okay. Okay, let me erase some of this. Okay. The lung is innervated by parasympathetic and sympathetic, right? Now, parasympathetic is what? Rest, relax, digest, or some people say feed and breathe. Now, sympathetic is, right? Fight, flight, right? Or run away, yes? Right? So, what is this going to do? What is this going to do to the bronchioles and such, right? What is sympathetic nerve supply going to do? Is it going to dilate or constrict? Okay, no, right? Sympathetic. Ah, I got to run away, yes? It's going to dilate, yes? If I'm running a 5K, I better get some air in and out of there, right? Yes? Conversely, if I'm laying on the couch digesting my food, do I need to breathe a bunch of air? Am I to digest my food? No, just the opposite. So that's going to constrict the airways, right? Okay. Okay. Now, we talked about this pleura, the visceral and the parietal, okay? Sometimes these get inflamed. It's usually after you've had a pneumonia. And what happens is you get a sharp pain, usually across here, right? And that sharp pain, every time you breathe, you get a sharp pain. And we have a name for that. And the name for that is pleurisy. Pleurisy. Every time you breathe, ow, right? Usually comes on after you've had a upper respiratory infection. Okay. Pleural effusion. Sometimes you will get more fluid. You will get more fluid in here. It will leak into the lung and lungs will fill up. Pleural effusion. All right. Okay. Alrighty. The lungs. The lungs are always going to assume their smallest position in size, right? They're going to contract like a balloon unless acted on by muscles. Okay. And we said inhalation, when the external intercostals raise the chest and make that bigger and the diaphragm goes down, that takes energy in the form of ATP. But to exhale, it doesn't. It's just contracting. It's because the lungs are elastic. And when you lose that elastic property, that's way bad. Okay? Now, a couple of lung conditions. We already talked about atelectasis. That's a collapsed lung. Okay? Let me explain. Okay, I have my picture with my alveoli here. Yes? And if it gets plugged with mucus, okay, if it gets plugged with mucus, remember the smokers have a hard time getting rid of that mucus. What's going to happen is, right, you still have air in here. But what's going to happen over a period of time is this. No air in, no air out. There's a saying, nature abhors a vacuum. Okay? And what's going to happen is, the air is going to be absorbed and that's going to collapse. okay? That's what's going to happen, okay? And when it collapses, it can be the whole lung or it can be part of the lung, okay? But anyway, atelectasis. Okay, pneumo, Pneumo, pneumothorax, okay? If you get a bunch of air in here more than normal, right? It's usually from pow hitting your chest, either a motorcycle wreck or a car wreck, an old car that doesn't have airbags, and you hit your chest on the steering column, which was very common when I was a kid, right? You can get a pneumothorax, okay? Air in the pleural cavity, and what they will do is stick chest tubes in you and suck that air out, right? And if your lung has a tendency to collapse, atelectasis, they will keep that on for a long period of time. If it's a very small amount, they stick a needle in there and suck the air out with a big needle, a big syringe, one of those, not that big, around about that long, okay? But if your lung is collapsed, they will put the chest tubes in and use a suction for 24 hours to keep that lung inflated, and then they have to leave it on there for several days until the problem is better and you don't need it anymore. Okay? Right? We talked about Mr. Boyle. Boyle's law: at a constant temperature, the pressure of a gas varies inversely with its volume. Volume gets big, inversely, pressure goes down. Volume gets small, pressure goes up. Okay? Okay. Tidal volume. Tidal volume, right? In the ocean, the tide comes in, the tide goes out, right? Tidal volume is about, here we go, is about 500 mils. Write that down. Tidal volume is about 500 mils. Normally, if you breathe in, you take in about 500 mils. If you breathe out, you breathe out about 500 mils. Okay? That's not if you're running and such. But anyway, that's normal tidal volume. Okay? Now, let's talk about inspiratory reserve volume, IRV. Okay? Right? Okay? Now, Dawn's going to volunteer for this one. Come right up here, young lady. Okay? Right? Okay, turn your back to me. Now, just take a normal breath. Breathe in and breathe out. And breathe in. Now, breathe in some more. Breathe in some more. Breathe in more. Breathe in more. As much as you can. Okay. That's the no, I'm not done with you yet, young lady. That's the inspiratory reserve volume. Normally, she's going to breathe in and out about 500 mils. But if she forces herself, you can make your chest bigger and breathe in more, right? Okay. Now, this is a fun one too. Okay. Now, take a breath for me and breathe out. Now, breathe out more. Breathe out more. Breathe out more. Keep pushing. Keep pushing. Right?
I dropped out.
Okay. Right. That's the expiratory reserve volume, right? If you breathe in and you breathe out, can you blow all the air out? No, but you can. As much as you can. That's expiratory reserve volume. Okay. Right? Yes. And what happens is this. At the expiratory reserve volume, when you breathe out all you can, there's still some air in your lungs, and that is called residual. That's your residual volume. Okay? Right? That is why when you kill people and you stuff them in water, you have to go pow, pow, and poke holes in their lungs, otherwise they'll float up very quickly, right? And you don't want to get caught, so you want to, right? You heard about that Lake Mead? In 2 months they found another third person, right? Yes. Anyway, right? So, yes, they say that like the Navy SEALs in Vietnam, when they would kill the Vietnamese, that's where they'd stick them in the water and make sure and poke some holes and hold them down so the air would come out. So you would take a couple of days. When you die, germs are going to grow, and germs produce gas, just like me and you do, and so eventually it's going to float up. But for a couple of days, you'll stay down there if you knock holes in the, right? But anyway, yes. Okay? Okay. See if we talked about that. Yeah, we talked about that. Expiration is passive, right? Make sure you get that. Expiration is passive. It doesn't take energy to blow out. Okay? Okay. Asthma. Okay? Okay. The bronchioles, the air tubes, right? Smooth muscle. And the smooth muscle, right? Under nervous control, the nerves, but also under certain chemicals, right? Will cause them to constrict